Have you ever had that feeling in a meeting where you just wish you could see past the corporate smile and know who you're really dealing with? Well, in business, that ability isn't just a nice to have, it's a crucial edge. Today, we're going to dive into how you can actually develop that insight. We'll use some pretty fascinating stories and some practical tools to see what's really going on behind the mask.
So let's start with a story. Actually, two stories that on the surface seem completely unrelated. One involves a future American president, and the other a super flamboyant golf pro. But when you put them together, they reveal a powerful truth about character.
Okay, so get this. The author first runs into Richard Nixon in Paris, sees him twice in just a few days. Then, a few years later, his firm ends up representing Doug Sanders, a golfer with this wild reputation that kind of made clients a little nervous. So, on one hand, you've got the ambitious future president. On the other, the flashy showman. You'd think you know who to trust, right? Well, what happened next is going to turn that whole assumption on its head.
And the observation about Nixon is just fascinating. It wasn't that he was rude or anything, but his interactions were completely, canned. He used the exact same lines, word for word, both times, like he was just pulling from a pre-written script labeled How to Talk to Sports People. It just revealed this deep phoniness, a total disconnect from the actual human being standing right in front of him.
Now, contrast that with Doug Sanders, the guy everyone thought was a wild card. He plays this exhibition match in Canada that his agency knows nothing about, and he gets paid in cash. He could have just pocketed the whole thing and no one would have ever known. But what does he do instead? He quietly counts out his agent's commission, sticks it in a plain envelope, and mails it. No big announcement, no fanfare, just a simple, powerful act of pure integrity.
And that's the whole point, right there. A person's true nature, their real self, is remarkably consistent. It doesn't show up in the big, polished presentations. No, it leaks out in the small, unguarded moments, like when they use the same canned phrases over and over, or when they do the right thing when absolutely no one is watching.
These stories really just highlight a much bigger idea. In the business world, almost everyone is wearing a mask. The real key to success, then, is learning how to see the person behind it.
We all have what you could call a corporate persona. It's that professional version of ourselves we put on for meetings. But underneath all that is the real self. And believe me, that's the part that doesn't change. No matter how good the act is in any long-term relationship, you're eventually going to be dealing with that person's true nature. And this is exactly why it matters so much. Doesn't matter if you're selling, negotiating, or hiring someone, your effectiveness just skyrockets when you can understand where the other person is really coming from. It's all about getting past that surface-level chatter to the core of who they are.
Okay, so that all sounds great, but how do you actually do this? Well, the good news is it's not magic, it's a set of skills you can learn. So let's break down the practical tools you can start using pretty much immediately to sharpen your perception.
First up, tool number 1, listen aggressively. This means you got to hear what's not being said. Take this great story about Pepsi and Burger King. For months, Pepsi kept pushing this idea of consumer choice. And for months, Burger King kept shooting it down. It wasn't until a Pepsi exec finally listened to the subtext that Burger King's whole identity was being the scrappy underdog that they finally cracked the code. Burger King's response was priceless. We've been trying to tell you that for months.
Next, tool number 2, observe aggressively. And look, this is about more than just noticing if someone leans forward when they talk. It's about building a complete picture. You have the conscious signals, like an office covered with diplomas to project an image, and then you have the unconscious ones, like that fleeting look between two colleagues that tells you who really has the power in the room.
And you've got to use the venue to your advantage. A boardroom is a stage, and everyone on that stage is playing a role. But what happens when you take them to lunch? You can learn a ton from how they treat a waiter, or how they handle a simple choice on a menu, or even how impatient they get over a tiny delay. I'm telling you, these are invaluable clues.
And this brings us to the golf course, which is basically like a truth serum for business character. The translation of these small behaviors is just so direct and powerful. The guy who kind of half swipes at a short gimme putt and then counts it anyway, that's the person who's going to be really hard to pin down on the specifics in a deal. The person who fudges their score, that's the one who's going to creatively interpret the facts during a negotiation. It's an astonishingly accurate predictor of behavior.
All of these observations really point to the most powerful and honestly the most misunderstood force in any business interaction, the ego.
If you can't read the ego in the room, you're missing at least half the story. And here is the counterintuitive truth about ego that trips so many people up. Do not confuse the size of someone's ego with its strength. The loudest, most assertive person in the room, they often have the most fragile ego, and it's all driven by insecurity. Meanwhile, that quiet, low-key person in the corner might just have the strongest, most secure ego of all.
And knowing this distinction is absolutely critical. People with strong egos are usually way more efficient to deal with. They make decisions, they're consistent, and you always know where you stand. Weak egos, on the other hand, they're unpredictable. They go back and forth, they're harder to read, and they often care more about how things look than about getting results.
But here's the ultimate warning, and it's a big one. The biggest ego you have to manage is your own. If you're not aware of your own biases, your own blind spots, you're just going to project them onto other people. True insight always begins with self-awareness. You simply cannot see others clearly if your own ego is clouding your vision. Okay, so we've covered the why and the what. Now it's time for the how. This is a clear 7-step framework you can use to put all of these principles into practice, starting today.
All right, here's your action plan. 1 and 2 we've covered. Listen and observe aggressively. You get it. Number 3, talk less. I know, this is the hardest one for a lot of people, but the less you talk, the more they reveal. 4, re-examine your first impressions. Our brains love shortcuts, but they're often wrong, so challenge them. 5, pause before you act. Don't just gather all this information, actually use it to plan your next move. 6, be discreet. Your insight is your private advantage. Never show your hand by telling someone you've figured them out. And finally, number 7, be detached. You have to keep your emotions in check because they will always, always cloud your judgment.
And this, right here, is the ultimate payoff. When you can see people clearly and manage your own ego, you stop reacting to situations. Instead, you start acting within them, thoughtfully, strategically, and with control. This is how you turn simple perception into a powerful, real-world business advantage. So I'll just leave you with this question. In your very next meeting, your next phone call, maybe even your next lunch, what are you going to look for beyond just the words being spoken? What are you going to choose to see and hear?